everybody. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. My name is Aaron Christensen, and tonight we're going to be talking about one of Dario Argento's wildest and weirdest flicks, Phenomena. And I have gathered, just hang on, folks, I have gathered such an assemblage of big brains. Let's bring everybody in all at once. Let's see if I can get through. Go ahead and unmute yourselves. Let's go all the way around. We've got Lawrence P. RAFFEL. We've got Carl Lyon, we got Adam Rockoff, we've got John Kitley, and we have BRYAN Martinez. And we will talk all about today's featured presentation, which is Phenomena from 1985. And we'll also be talking about its bastardized version, which is Creepers, also from 1985. So, hey, everybody, welcome to the show. I'm just going to go around really quick because Lawrence and I have a little history about this film, but I feel like everybody has a connection to this film, like the story around their Phenomena. So, Lawrence, when did you first encounter this one?
So, I probably first encountered Phenomena as Creepers. Not many people don't want to admit that, but I feel like Creepers was a video store staple when I was a kid. Maybe you'd find some other Argentos around. There might be Suspiria, maybe Tenebrae is Unsane, but I feel like every video store had Creepers. So that was like really my first introduction, I think, to Argento as a kid, because it was the most accessible Argento in video stores.
Cool. Carl?
My first introduction to Phenomena, I kind of came into it a little bit late. Really, when DVD started taking off, I actually think it was one of those 2-packs the Anchor Bay put out. It was the Dario Argento collection, the Fulci collection, that was my first introduction to that. And it was funny because, as we've discussed, and Lawrence knows, when I was working for Monsters of Play, that's where my alias came from. Partially that movie and another one. So it had an impact.
Adam? Yeah, we're going to talk about usernames in a second here, Carl. Adam Rockoff, please tell us how you came to Phenomena and lean into the microphone.
It's a long story that I'll try to make very, very short. But like Lawrence, I was introduced to it as Creepers right when it came out. I was 10 or 11, and my mother at the time had become worried about my horror viewing. So she made up this very bizarre rule that I was no longer allowed to watch films with humans committing violence against humans. So no more slasher films, no more rape revenge, no more anything like that, no more serial killers. So we were in the video store, and the box, obviously, on Creepers is Jennifer Connelly with, bugs all over, flies all over her face. So she assumed this was, a good choice. I assume she thought it was something like, Them, or even something like Squirm, which I was watching all the time then. But, lo and behold, I went home, and I was expecting that too, because, the cover is, Jennifer Connelly with insects on it. But, in the first 5 minutes, if Argento gets her head cut off, I realized that this was something I had really never seen before. It was something different, and I just loved it.
John?
I worked at a video store when this came out, so I again, like Lawrence and Adam, saw it as Creepers. Couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. But then this is one of them that the more you learn about it, you realize that you're seeing the cut version. So then you immediately have to go, well, fuck, I got to see the whole thing. So that starts that whole quest. And then you realize half of Argento's other stuff, like Deep Red Hatchet Murders, is cut, and Unsane, which is Tenebrae. So it puts you on that quest to find the full uncut version.
And BRYAN?
My story is pretty similar to you gentlemen. This was the box art that was on the shelf. So it looks badass. Like it was like if you were a young kid into heavy metal and it says music by Iron Maiden and you got that going on, like you just like, so I was a latchkey kid and I rented mine from West Coast Video. So like I befriended the clerk and he would have like all these like latest horror movies that came out that he would like, slide over to me and be like, hey, look, check this one out. But this one I discovered on my own because it was just, the box was there and it was like, and this is, mind you, way beyond like being a horror film fan scholar and knowing about like the long version versus a short version or whatever. So when I watched this, I was like blown the fuck away. You know what I mean? It was just like, wow, this movie is nothing like I ever seen before. I need to like track down every Argento movie that exists, which if you're from the 80s, you know that that's an impossible feat back then. So so that's my introduction.
Wait, so this was your first Argento film, Brian?
Yes.
Who else was this their first Argento film?
Probably.
So Adam and Brian, Lawrence?
It would have to have been, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw Deep Red first, and I probably saw it as the Hatchet Murders. And then later, Suspiria was one that people had like, it was showing up on all the like the scariest movies of all time list, things like that. And I was like,
when did you see it, AC? Like,
see, this is the thing. Like when I met Lawrence like in 2004, because my wife was out in Philadelphia doing a play, and Lawrence's wife or girlfriend, I'm not sure which it was at the time, but
at the time, girlfriend.
Yeah. I don't think Michelle and I were married either yet, but anyway, so they were working together at the theater, and they both like, you need to meet my boyfriend.
Right. As good girlfriends do. Like my boyfriend always talks about horror movies. Your boyfriend always talks about horror movies. You guys have to meet.
And so we did. So
and you can leave us alone.
That was totally it. So Lawrence and I got together one night in Philly, and we had pizza and just geeked out for a while. And he was telling me about Monsters at Play, and it was this awesome movie review site. I think you started in like 2000. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was well into it at that point. Carl, you must have been on. Well, I know you were on staff at that point because your username is what first struck me, which is monkey with a straight razor. And I was like, that's a cool ass name. What a great name. Not that's realizing, great. Of course, that it's actually a reference to a film. And Lawrence, he slid me Phenomena. And I don't know, this must have been like a new release of Phenomena when it came out on DVD, because I feel like it was 2004, 2005 is when you
like an Anchor Bay or something.
Yep. Yeah. So you loaned it to me, and like everybody else, I was like, "What am I even watching? Is this an insect detective movie? What are you kidding?" And there's a monkey with a straight razor, so I immediately am like, "What? Wait a minute." Anyway, so that was my story with Phenomena. I definitely came to it later, but it was kind of the thing that lived up to the Argento reputation at that point, because I had friends who were, pushing like demons and opera and things like that on me. So I was versed with, the kind of weirdness of Italian horror, but this is definitely right up there. In watching it this most recent time in prep for the show, I was kind of struck by like how technically amazing it is.
Oh my God.
And I don't think that was something I appreciated at the time. I think just the weirdness kind of washed over me. I'm like, wait a minute, but like, all these stunts they do with insects and the insect effects and things like that, like I was really knocked out by it. And, I don't think when I first saw it, I was still just kind of entranced by the weirdness of Argento without really taking into account his technical expertise.
You know what bums me out is that, like, I read somewhere that Stivoletti did like a mechanical fly for close-ups or whatever. And Argento was like, yeah, we're not using that. But I would have loved to see like a Stivoletti mechanical fly or whatever. Like that would have been kind of cool.
I don't know. On the 4K print, man, that one close-up of the fly.
Yeah.
You don't need a fake fly. That thing looked amazing.
No, we need a fake fly in Italian films.
You had 4 of them, so you don't need any more.
He did tie strings to, like flies and wasps and,
the bee, right? Like
the bee's on a string. I think the fly's on a string. It's anyway. So does anybody want to take a stab at kind of like the synopses of this film?
I mean, look, here's what I'll say. So like, first of all, I had the same reaction you did after revisiting. I hadn't watched it in a while. It's a great movie. It's not one of my favorite Argentos, but it's a beautiful movie. It's got a great soundtrack, and the way the Demons has a great soundtrack kind of mixes, like the hard rock with like, Goblin. It's just a really all around great soundtrack. The movie itself, though, like upon revisiting it, completely disjointed. Like it doesn't know if it wants to be like, the girl controls bugs. At one point, you think it's going to go the carrier route, which is going to go after the girls that are making fun of her, and it's like you don't really know which direction it's ever going to go in. So it's kind of all over the place. And like for me, it's like unlike other Argento films, like the killer almost kind of plays like a secondary role in this movie. and as we were talking about the other day, it turns out that there is like more than one killer potentially, but it's just, I mean, I honestly, I know that's not a description, but like it defies
pretty much.
You've eaten up some valuable time, so that's good.
But no, Lawrence, to your point, I've watched this movie recently with my wife, so I was kind of like busy, kind of explaining to her certain things, and then like towards like going into the third act, I was like, oh yeah, there's a killer in this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does start off with a killing, as Adam pointed out, and we get the idea. Okay, there's a murderer on the loose, and it's a girls' school, and everybody starts kind of having Suspiria flashbacks. There's even that weird little bit of narration that just kind of comes out of nowhere and then never appears again.
Yeah.
Right. like all the other
Bandit all over again.
Yeah.
And so, but we have Jennifer Connelly playing a character named Jennifer, who goes off to this boarding school in Switzerland, and her father is a famous actor. And while she's there, she kind of gets caught up in the path of a serial killer.
Can I just interrupt real quick? Because I can't stop laughing about this. Because like everybody else, I watched the movie again last night, but I had seen it. It's probably the Argento film that I've seen the most out of any of them. And it really probably because I had that original video. But so not only does Jennifer Connelly / Corvino bring a poster of her father to the boarding school with her to put on her wall, but she brings multiple posters just in case there's some sort of accident, or in case she wants to put it on every single wall in the boarding house. There's so much weird stuff like that in the film.
I took it like she was trying to sell off the posters at some point.
Oh, okay.
That whole exchange with the roommate, did you take him to bed? And I'm like, she's like 13.
He's so attractive.
It was just the whole thing was really creepy. Watching it like 20 years later, I'm like, ooh.
Fun fact. Did you know that apparently, I don't know if this is true or whatever, but Argento apparently said it, that like he wanted to get what's his face? Al Pacino as like the famous actor that is her dad. And he was like, yeah, no, like.
Well, maybe he does have Al Pacino, because the father never shows up. So you could say Al Pacino played Jennifer Connelly's.
It's like the opera singer in opera that we never see. It's the same thing.
Oh, you killed the conversation, John.
All right. Well, let me just add.
Damn it, John.
While everybody's quiet, then let me just say that to Lawrence's point of all the things that are batshit crazy in this film is one of the reasons why I like it, because it doesn't play by. It's not Suspiria. It's not Deep Red. And maybe he doesn't know what he's trying to do, but I think that's one of the things that I liked about it, because it doesn't play by any of the rules. He is going all over the board. Is it a supernatural film? Is it a serial killer? It is a serial killer. And there's two killers, and he sets that up that you think it's one thing, and then the reveal, and then there's another reveal, and it's got some really nice quality kills in this one.
Big time. That's actually one of the most contested things about this film. Actually, is if it's a giallo or not.
Well, I mean, you got a monkey running around. He's
with a straight razor.
He doesn't have black gloves on, but he does find
we have the spear.
We have the spear
to click together.
Yeah. No, I
cool the way that like they do the spear.
I do think it is crazy, but that's one of the charms for me that I like.
I was going to say partly to John's point, and I don't know if this is the point that John was trying to make. Part of the charm is in its ineptitude, because you know that Argento is a skilled filmmaker. And I feel like while it comes across a bit wonky, it's probably there's a lot of factors that probably caused that to happen, I'm assuming, while they were making the movie. But he is such a skilled filmmaker that is part of its charm. And that's what makes it so endearing, is that, this isn't just like a schlock filmmaker who's making a bad movie. This is a skilled filmmaker, and he's got a lot of really great thoughts in there. They have a little trouble kind of pulling it together. And I'm sure the multiple edits and other issues that they had while making the movie probably all contributed to that.
I also heard that there was a lot of drugs involved in the making of this film. So
It was the 80s.
I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, but there was, I mean, because Argento, he's very good at set pieces, and this feels like a collection of set pieces, and it doesn't necessarily always thread together, but I do like it a lot, and he's got a pretty solid cast. You know, I think Donald Pleasance as our entomologist, it's one of my favorite horror roles of his.
Donald Pleasance in anything.
True.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
Carl,
except for John's favorite Giallo film.
Now you're the one that shut everybody up, not me.
So I think I'm going to play contrarian here just to spice the conversation up.
thank you, Adam.
I gotta say, you know, watching it again last night and having watched it so many times, what I'm struck with really isn't how disjointed it is. I mean, I don't know, when I watched Bird with the Crystal Plumage for the first time, certainly Tenebrae, certainly Four Flies, I mean, I didn't know what was going on. Even Deep Red, I didn't know what was going on. But with this one, I felt like the scenes in and of themselves are ridiculous. I mean, some silly stuff happens when, you know, the poor girl's sleepwalking and they're telling her, oh, that causes schizophrenia. I mean, just stuff like that doesn't make any sense or rhyme or reason. But as a linear film, if you watch it, from scene to scene, it kind of makes sense. In fact, the characters telegraph what they're going to do. They say where they're going. They say what they're doing. So, again, I understand why a lot of people think it might be all over the place. And in terms of thematic, stylistically, it is all over the place. But I do think it's one of the films where you can watch it, and if you watch it closely, you can see that it's sort of a linear story.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's just there's insane elements in all of the scenes that don't feel like they connect.
He never picked a lane.
Yeah, like that whole thing where, you know, she, you know, it's like she gets picked up in the middle of the street by those teenage boys who then proceeds to sexually assault her. Then she like rolls out into the forest, conveniently to the backyard of the entomologist, where his chimp is outside to bring her inside to the house. There's a clear path going on here, but it's like just veering off all over the fucking place.
No, but Adam brings up a good point. And I agree with you 100%. I think the thing that for me is that it doesn't know what kind of horror movie it wants to be. Does it want to be about a girl that controls bugs for whatever reason she controls bugs? Is it about a killer? Is it about, you know, a girl who has telekinetic powers that takes revenge on people? Like, it doesn't really ever know what kind of movie it wants to be, but it is one of the easiest Argento movies to digest, especially for someone who's not like really into Argento. Like, I feel like I could show it to my wife and she'd be like, oh, okay, I get it, you know?
Yeah, my wife loved it, like when I introduced her to it. But by the way, we don't know what this movie is about because nobody has.
We still have a synopsis.
Synopses are for amateurs. Yeah.
We want people to go in blind completely.
Except they know that there's two killers.
And this was also right at the end of Argento's both personal and professional relationship with Daria Nicolodi, who plays, spoiler, certainly a mysterious woman. But she turns it up to 11 in a few scenes, and I think is also in the way that Pleasance downplays everything. Like, this is not Dr. Loomis here. We've got a very quiet, reserved performance by Pleasance, whereas Nicolodi is like through the roof, and it's kind of entertaining and fun to watch. Although you have to wonder, you know, once you know the backstory, you're like, wow, like she's getting mistreated on screen quite a bit. And you go,
I mean, when hasn't she been mistreated on screen?
And that continued into opera too. So that was 3 years later or 2
It
years.
was a tough time.
Tough relationship.
For her and Argento during that particular decade.
He took it out on screen.
But I do like the fact that Donald Pleasance continues his powers of scene stealing, where he just takes his time and draws that scene out even longer than possible, and that's a real pro.
So we talked a little bit about the music. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because I think people who are coming to it, I mean, certainly, you know, Argento was a trailblazer in terms of having rock music in his horror films, But this is heavy metal, and at times, like specifically, you know, the Iron Maiden cut of, you know, Flash of the Blade, like that feels kind of out of nowhere and not necessarily in accordance with the scenes that it's in.
I disagree with you.
Carry on, disagree.
And
justify the Flash of the Blade, especially the second one when she's getting the phone.
Like, I mean, okay, this is just me being biased, but when you're a kid who has an Iron Maiden patch on the back of your jean jacket and you're watching this movie and all of a sudden Flash of a Blade just fucking comes on, you're just like, oh my God, this was meant to be. This is like the epitome of horror movies or whatever, you know? Because honestly, when being a young kid watching this movie, afterwards, all other horror movies were spoiled for me because it didn't do what this did. You know what I mean? So for me, it fit. It was perfect. So I don't know.
It's funny, just playing off of what Brian said. I actually hate the fact that they use Flash of the Brick Blade and Motorhead and heavy metal songs. I love Simonetti's score and Bill Wyman's work in this. Yep. I think it's beautiful. But for a kid who literally at this time was listening to Power Slave, because that was the most recent Iron Maiden album that had come out, and being, you know, Iron Maiden was and still is my all-time favorite band, and being in this movie that had created this world that you didn't know what was going on, and then suddenly Flash of the Blade, which you're listening to in your room, it was such, I don't even know what the word is to describe it, but it was very jarring and unsettling and both comforting and upsetting at the same time.
The movie is very dreamy. So it's kind of weird because it seems like it's following its own set of rules. Because, yeah, we kind of focus on the insanity of it, but we kind of do because that's just the rules of that world are kind of weird. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when you kind of get this anchor point of like, yo, there's Maiden in this weird multiverse of nonsense, as well as our own world, it's like this weird point. You're just like, whoa. And, yeah, it grounds it in a really strange way. And, you know,
I was just going to say, I guess that was my way in to this movie, like, nothing else made sense, you know?
And I mean, it is, you know, and if you think about what's kind of cool, is that could also be somebody's introduction to these bands, and I mean that could also be like another cool thing for people. It's just, but yeah, it is a bit jarring though. I mean, yeah, it's really awesome to hear Maiden, but yeah, the actual speed of that song with this girl stalking through the halls of the building, it's odd, but again. This whole movie is, like I said, follows its own weird rules in its own little pocket universe.
I mean, I would also just say, I think that, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but I mean, I love Goblin and I love all the soundtracks to Argento movies, but I think that those were atypical of the time of what a horror soundtrack really sounded like.
For sure.
So I don't think that it's that out of the question to say that, oh, maybe they'll throw in, you know, a heavy metal song or some other type of music that maybe wouldn't quite seem to fit at the moment, because I feel like that's kind of what they did at the time.
Well, and I think, I mean, and bless him for experimenting, but I think in the way that Goblin does work in, you know, Suspiria, in Deep Red,
Tenebrae,
I just don't know that the Iron Maiden works for me in that same way. Like, it doesn't seem to fit with the tempo of the scene itself. Whereas
I don't
stuff
think it was Iron Maiden. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I don't think it was Iron Maiden so much as the song choice. If you played the opening to "Hallowed Be Thy Name," I think it could have worked brilliantly. Sure, but you have this fast, you know, upbeat, you know, whatever music line that just, you know, it came out of nowhere. It was distracting.
Yeah,
drugs.
That's what
drugs. It's all drugs.
The guitar, the opening guitar, the first time the Flash of the Blade is in there, I think works.
I agree.
Because that jarring guitar startles the audience into the action. Using it the second time, probably not the best idea.
Well, and also, why are you using it a second time? I mean, it's a song,
because it's a dope song.
But the real crime here is every time this gets a new release and they have a soundtrack, it's just the Goblin soundtrack, and the stuff that Bill Wyman did in the opening sequence, I think is my favorite part of that entire soundtrack.
Yep.
I mean,
Goblin's never available.
Yeah, exactly. Goblin's stuff works, especially in the dream or the sleepwalking sequences.
But you know it from that cue, right?
That opening track that Bill Wyman did, I think, is incredibly atmospheric.
Can I just read this because it's
I don't know.
You're gonna get to the synopsis now?
Yeah. But I read it, and it's a real fast and concise synopsis, but it's a funny one.
Lay it on us.
25 minutes.
An American, Jennifer Connelly, at a Swiss finishing school, calls on insects to help a paralyzed scientist, Donald Pleasance, fight a monster. That's basically the whole synopsis.
I feel like they just gave up at the end. Like, fight a monster.
Yeah, done. If I could go home, then it's great. Yes, let's go with it.
I hit word count. I'm done.
He didn't lie.
Right. It's what it is.
Well, let's talk about the monster.
There's a lot of nuances within, but
let's talk about the monster and Stivaletti's work in this, because I forget who mentioned it, but there are some really great kill sequences, but there's also that really awesome reveal at the end of the kid.
Yeah.
That scene, like, honestly, that is like a core memory, is that first scene of like him getting spun around and the mouth. Like, that's it, just the mouth.
And the maggots. The maggots on the face, the real ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that was
they doused him in glucose so everything could stick to him.
Yeah, there's a great documentary. It's ported over from the 2017 Arrow Blu-ray release on this new Synapse release, which is the UHD, and it's a 2-hour, which is longer than the movie. There's a documentary called "Of Flies and Maggots," and it's super in depth, but they do talk to the actor, the little person who played the kid. And yeah, it sounds like he went through a pretty rough time playing that part. I mean, like, basically he's blind. He can't see in that mask. And he does literally have flies all over him. Like, they threw a net around the set so that the flies couldn't go anywhere but on him.
It's awful.
That was in the
our
contract.
entertainment.
And then, of course, they set the lake on fire and they throw him into it. It's like,
Yeah.
On a good note, you won't have flies on you.
That's the good news.
Or skin.
Although what surprised me on the 4K one is the first kill is still blurry. It's still out of focus, it's still grainy, I should say, not blurry. And I was thinking on every version that I've seen, the minute it goes into slow motion, you get that grainy feel to it for some reason, and the 4K is the exact same way. So that was kind of disappointing.
I thought that I assumed that was an artistic choice. No, it's a mistake.
I'm assuming it has to be now because it's even in the 4K.
Right.
Well, I guess
why would that be an artistic choice?
Why would half the thing? Yeah, I don't know. But I just assumed it was one of his, weird quirks.
I want this blurry and really grainy. Because one day 4K,
Yeah. Either that or the kid in the makeup was operating the camera at the time. Yeah, it looks good.
By the way, it says that Stivaleti drew inspiration from sufferers of Patau syndrome. So I guess people with Patau syndrome look like that.
Oh, not to bring everybody down.
Yeah, I was like,
oh man, deformed
it's a real
kid,
thing.
My favorite.
We knew a kid who had that Patau syndrome, and he actually didn't look like the kid. But the first time, which was probably only like 10 years ago, that I heard of what they were trying to do with this syndrome, and we knew somebody who had it. Usually, the kids only live, I think, like 6 months to a year, if at all. It's very sad. It's a terrible disease. They usually don't make it into adolescence or teenagehood or whatever. It's just it's awful because they also
I'm done with this show.
I'm gonna get off and go hug my kid.
Right.
So let's talk. I mean, there's a lot of bugs in this movie. I mean, Jennifer Connelly's character has the power to communicate with insects telepathically. She's introduced, like petting a bee on her hand in the car, which I found out, like, when they cut to the driver and then back to the back seat, like those were shot like months apart. like the driver and the scene with Daria and Jennifer in the backseat, like they weren't even in the same country. Like
movie magic.
Yeah, it was beautiful. But anyway, so she has the power to connect with a lot of flies, with the firefly, and that is. Now, is it the firefly that leads her? What does the firefly lead her to? I remember the scene.
The glove, the killer.
It leads her to the glove. That's right.
Yeah.
Where the great sarcophagus maggot is living, and that is a big plot point because this particular maggot only feeds on human remains, and so that means there's a corpse out there somewhere. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I love the part that Donald Pleasance just playing like severe dick mode in here when he goes, yes, it's 15 days for every fly or every stage. And the cop is like, so it's 8 months. Well, it's the rainy season. So 8.5 months. Well, it was also underwater. I'm like, fucker, why didn't you say that right from the get-go?
It's great. And the timing, the whole point of the timing of the flies in the larva stages never comes into play. The only thing that comes into play is if the larva's there, then that's where the killer is. And they do go through this whole math lesson that makes your head hurt just listening to it.
And there's that scene, the scene toward the end with Jennifer Connelly in that pool.
Yeah.
And apparently, apparently that was pretty nasty. Apparently, that was more real than it probably needed to be.
What do we know about that? What was in there?
Maggots.
Well, yeah, when they were shooting it, like what did they use? Like, do we know?
Maggots.
I think it was actually maggots.
Yeah, in Poltergeist, it was like oatmeal and
yeah. No, the Italians. Stuff. The Italians do it different.
We can't afford oatmeal.
So we got to get the real stuff.
Get some real.
Gotta get the offal.
But the way they did that scene with all the flies up against the window that went surrounding the chateau is first you've got the image of the kind of the cloud of flies coming over, and that was done with by dumping like coffee grounds into water, and it just kind of trailed down. But then in terms of like seeing all the insects against the windows, they had two frames of glass and the flies were just all trapped in between them. And so that's how they kept all the flies, in one place at one time. And Dario tells a hilarious story about like how when they were transporting the flies from wherever they were getting them from into Switzerland. And like they got stopped at the border for like 2 days. They're like, you're not bringing all these flies in here. And then when they were done with the flies, Luigi Cosi's like, do whatever you want with them. and they literally just opened the cage and there was this huge cloud of flies like escapes into Italy and just like gloms onto the windows for like days and days.
Argento shooting another goddamn film. Here we go.
Introducing invasive species everywhere.
And on that note, I mean, because this was actually a huge hit in Italy. Like Argento was on fire at this point, and even though it wasn't a huge international hit like Deep Red or Bird of the Crystal Plumage, it was still quite successful in Italy, apparently.
Well, it's interesting because I think the only reason why Argento didn't direct Demons was because he was doing this movie. So, but you have Suave and Demons, and you got Suave in this film, and then you have Fiore also in Demons, and she's in this film. So I wonder, like, when the production dates are for both films, because if he couldn't, if he could only contribute to Demons because of this film, that means that they were both sort of like overlapping each other in terms of shooting schedules or whatever.
This one came out the 31st of 85, January 31st. Sorry.
Oh, it was early. Okay.
So they probably did Demons after this.
I mean, maybe.
Why don't you know this, Brian?
Yeah,
it's just like Brian knowledge you have.
Because I smoked a lot of marijuana when I was young. And
fantastic.
It just all escapes me. So.
Like
Lawrence,
the flies.
Lawrence and I were talking. That's the lady of the flies. Lawrence and I were talking. My background's going wild. Lawrence and I were talking last night about the idea that like this film, a lot of you all saw the Creepers version of it. And was this kind of like, John, I think you kind of alluded to it, the idea of this sparking the idea of this is an incomplete version. That means there's a complete version out there somewhere. And how do you, you know, back in the olden days, like how did you go about finding it?
You didn't. Right? Like
a special thing called bootlegs.
Yeah, I would say like when I was that age, I probably I'm dating myself. When I first saw it, I probably didn't know from uncut to cut and didn't really know that even existed. I would say when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I entered into like the tape trading market and just kind of like met people. There was no online. I met people in weird ways, man. Like I once wrote a letter to Fangoria, and they printed my entire address where they printed my letter, and people like started writing me because my address was in an issue of Fangoria. Or
don't laugh at that, Lawrence. I have friends to this day that I met 30 years ago from my letters getting published in there.
And the best part was I was basically, the bulk of my letter was complaining because they shipped their magazines in these little black plastic bags, and they arrived like crinkled and torn and like in bad shape. And I was like, I'm canceling my subscription. But then I said something like complimentary to them, and it was like ... By the way, you're awesome. And that was what they posted in their magazine. And then people started like sending me letters. But I mean, like, early on, so I had a Laserdisc player, right? So my hook was that I could supply people with widescreen movies, dubs of widescreen movies. So like the first Criterion Halloween, when Elite Entertainment first did Night of the Living Dead and remastered it, a lot of those movies I had on Laserdisc. So I started by trading widescreen movies of Laserdisc dubs for uncut Argento and Fulci and other movies like that.
This is the nerdiest thing I've ever heard. I love it.
No. That's
how I got in the game because I had nothing to offer. Like I had nothing to give these people.
So, and that's kind of what sparked Monsters at Play, though, is that you were looking to kind of share this, like there were these films like Phenomena that was being released uncut, and people didn't recognize what a big deal that was.
Yeah, I mean, like this was early 2000s, so Anchor Bay really was kind of like Anchor Bay, Image Entertainment, and some smaller distributors, like maybe like a little bit from like Shriek Show and some companies like that. But Anchor Bay really was like the crux of that. They were releasing the Argentos and the Fulcis and stuff like that. And at the time, there were a handful of review sites out there. Mondo Digital, which is still out there and is still like the site to go for reviews, but also some other sites that weren't that great. And my perception was that, these sites just wanted free movies and they could write about them. And at the time, when we first started, my whole thing was like, well, if they can get free movies, I can get free movies. So we built a website and we started writing reviews, and then the screeners started coming in. But then it turned into something else. It was more about educating people, talking about these movies that not a lot of people were talking about in a way that I felt really kind of like celebrated them. And it ties in the whole thing about like lending you Phenomena. It's like it was more about sharing and building a community around it. And like Carl and other people who wrote for the site, they reached out to me and they were just like, hey, I love your site, I'd love to start writing for you. And I was like, all right, let's talk about what you want to write about. So we just kind of built this community of like-minded individuals who loved these movies and wanted to share and talk about them. And that's how it kind of built from there.
Well, and John, I mean, that's kind of like the hallmark of Kitley's Crypt, I mean, the motto is discover the horror, and then you were, when did you start your website?
98.
So, and that was your thing was there it is.
Thanks, Adam. Here's a quarter.
But I mean, like that idea of sharing this information you have and getting other people who are, sitting in their metaphorical basements and going, I'm the only one who knows about this and I have nobody to connect with about it.
Yeah. I mean, that, to Lawrence's point, I mean, it's a community. You build that community because the more people you connect with, the more you're going to get in return, kind of like the whole tape trading aspect of it. But the more you're going to learn. Because if you hook somebody up with Argento, they're going to go, oh shit, have you ever heard of Bruno Mattei? For better or for worse, but you're going to, that connection, that street goes both ways. So you're going to learn more and more, and you're going to make more and more connections, and it never stops. We've been doing this for how long? And it never stops.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, John's right. I mean, I was trading lists with people in the early to mid 90s, and, you know, it was like all different kinds of things. Like one dude I was trading with liked to collect bootleg Kiss concerts. So I'd send him a couple of, like, you know, horror movies. He'd send me some bootleg Kiss concerts. And it was like all different kinds of things. But, like, I just remember, like, you know, talking on the phone with people and be like, oh, I've got this movie you might like. And it was like, oh, Coffin Joe. And like, oh, what's Coffin Joe? And you kind of like explain it to them. And you're like, well, and, you know, you just kind of get into it and just kind of like exchange different, you know, ideas and movies that you probably wouldn't have known about if you hadn't really had these conversations.
Plus, that also, sorry, Brian, it also goes to the education of, I've got a copy of Creepers. Well, no, I've got the uncut copy. And then, or like Dawn of the Dead, well, you have the theatrical version, then you have Romero's version, then you have Argento's version. So as you're trading, you're learning about the films and the films itself, not necessarily into the running times, but also certain scenes that were cut out. Because like Opera, I don't think is cut at all. It was just retitled. Tenebrae's cut slightly for Unsane. So you have to know which parts are cut. Not that, oh, it's this version, it's uncut. No, you got to have the hatchet scene. You got to have this. So,
and that's also back before there was the internet, when you could just look stuff up, you know?
Yeah.
Brian, and then Carl, I know you had something. Brian?
Well, I was going to say, like, that's how I discovered about, like, it being cut or uncut or whatever, is like somebody had the Anchor Bay version in the 90s. And I was like, wait, Phenomena? Like, it's the same cover as Creepers or whatever. And like, because at that point, I wasn't like, I guess, a horror guy or whatever. I just loved Italian horror movies, and I loved, you know, horror movies or whatever. But back then it wasn't really like, oh, he's the horror kid and he goes to horror conventions and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But so like, it's interesting because, you know, I saw that, and then I read Fangoria, and then it kind of explained that, you know, there's like cut versions and like actual, because like back then when I first saw the movie, I said this in another podcast, but I also found Dario Argento's World of Horror, and then that was like, okay, like he's got like a bunch of other movies that I need to find or whatever. But I found like Unsane, and then like, you know, all these chopped up versions of his, you know, movies or whatever. So back then, just being young and naive, like I just had no idea that like there's a Phenomena, there's Tenebrae, and, you know, all these other actual like versions of the movies or whatever. And, you know, like looking back at Creepers, I don't hate Creepers because it was my first experience with Argento. Okay. So I look at it very fondly, but like, you know, if you're going to show somebody Phenomena, you need to show them the actual Phenomena version or whatever. But
Carl?
So back to oh, sorry, I have a cat walking. So yeah, his name is Grim. So what was interesting is bringing it back to the, you know, the whole idea of communities. You know, I came across Monsters at Play. I was like 19, I was like early 20s at the time. I was like working for Best Buy, and, you know, remember like everything was getting released on like DVD. It was just like this absolute just deluge. And so, you know, I started to kind of dabble more into horror. And I remember specifically, it was the Anchor Bay put out the Giallo collection, which had like Short Night of the Glass Dolls and stuff on it. It was that yellow box. And, you know, I remember saying, you know, okay, I don't know anything about this stuff. Like I'd kind of dabbled, you know, dipped my toe in the more mainstream stuff, but then you get, you know, I'm out of my scope here. You know, the search engine was just so clunky. And I think Monsters of Play probably just came up by default because, again, who the hell else was talking about this? And, you know, and yeah, it didn't come across as, you know, when you get people that are super into kind of counterculture or subculture, they, you know, it wasn't gatekeepery is what I kind of liked about it. You know, it was kind of like, look, we understand that not everybody's going to know everything. That's just, it's, so it didn't take like a sense of like, nah, about it. And there was also even just the idea of like, what's art to people? Everything's art to somebody. So, but back to that point, the community thing was really what kind of drew me into it. And, you had to rely on that because there really wasn't any major authority. All of your information was decentralized, like just thrown to the four winds. And the whole thing was really like kind of like DIY punk rock in a really cool way.
Yeah.
AAC.
Yeah.
I hope you have more time for this because it's like 45 minutes and we haven't even talked about the actual movie yet.
I'm just gonna add that in later. I'm gonna have me reading off the back of the DVD.
Before we get to the movie, I have just a quick funny story to tell, kind of related to the whole alternate cuts, alternate titles. So back in the tape trading days, I had a bootleg of Della Morte Della More, and then one weekend in the paper there was this art house theater in the city outside, just in Philadelphia, that was playing a movie called Cemetery Man. Now, I had never seen any artwork for it. I'd seen the movie, obviously. The ad in the paper was a picture of Rupert Everett kind of standing over a grave with a shovel, which is like that one image that they tend to use for the Cemetery Man poster and video box cover. But I didn't connect the dots. I was like, oh, I'm going to go see this horror movie, Cemetery Man. So I go to the theater. I sit down. The movie starts. The music kicks in. The credits come in. I'm like, this looks really familiar. I'm like, wait a second. This is Della Morte Della More. Now, the average person would be pissed because they think, oh, shit, I've just been had. Like, I've been scammed. And I'm like thinking, oh, my God, I'm about to see Della Morte Della More in a movie theater projected on film. And it was like one of the best days ever because I was like, oh, my God, I can't believe I actually get to do this. But it was like, it's like things like that where like I didn't even make the connection back then that this was a movie that I've had a bootleg of for probably close to a year.
Right? I mean, that is and that idea of these different cuts, that you've seen Creepers and then somebody lays Phenomena on you and like suddenly it's I wouldn't say a whole different movie, but it's definitely
it's a new experience, right?
Absolutely, that's a great way of putting it. It's a new experience. We're just like there's so much more texture to it. There's so many more, obviously there's more scenes and footage and
it makes more sense.
Does it though? Adam, I feel like we've been talking all over. Do you have anything you want to throw in?
I was going to make a joke about falling asleep, because not because of this conversation, but I can't get past the part in Creepers when Jennifer Connelly is still in the boarding school, and they put the nurse to watch her, and they literally choose the nurse because evidently she's strict, and the one instruction they give her is watch her and don't let her leave and don't fall asleep. Within 3 seconds of the head mistress leaving the room, the nurse is like this. They chose the one narcoleptic nurse on staff to do the most important thing in the film. It's just
with that there's her sleepwalking where she sleepwalks all the way like out the window, off the ledge, is hanging by the thing, falls, hits the ground, is still in a trance, and you're like, wow, that is some solid sleepwalking. Well done.
It's like a Tom and Jerry bit. It's like so ridiculous. The dress catching on the nail and that breaks her fall a little bit. It was almost slapstick. It was super. Yeah.
Well, so the second half of the movie is they're trying to convince people to get her to come get her so she doesn't stay at this school where she's potentially going to be murdered. She's like, I don't want to be murdered. I don't want to go back to this school.
Teenagers.
Can we talk about our monkey with the straight razor? Because I feel like she has not gotten nearly enough talk.
Are we not? We're not getting into like spoiler territory with that one.
Oh, I mean, this is an old movie.
I mean, okay, because
also, if anybody's made it this far in this conversation,
they're already spoiled for everything ever.
We've spoiled more than just the movie at this point.
Yeah,
spoiled the good 49 minutes 40 seconds.
That's right. But anyway, yes.
I mean, the monkey with the straight razor thing. Well, first of all, can I just say I love the introduction when she kind of rolls in and, she's got the scalpel and Donald Pleasance then has to, like, show her, like, this is bad. This will hurt you. And it's like, what was that paper made out of? And or how dull was that scalpel? The poor Donald's, like, hacking.
He couldn't cut it to
Foreshadowing, dude. Foreshadowing.
Like, yo, this monkey's not learning anything from you, dude. Like,
you did not want to give a monkey a really sharp scalpel. Just leave it at that. You never know.
But
I mean, the legend says that he's still out there somewhere with the straight razor.
Well, the straight razor was just left behind in a trash can somewhere too, like a really pristine straight razor.
I just have to say that is my second favorite example of Chekhov's gun ever. Just like the first one being Kindergarten Cop with the ferret, but this one what cracks you up is it's just fishes it out of the trash can. That's it. First of all, who's just throwing out random straight razors in park trash cans?
But also the foreshadow is laid on so thick. There's that whole thing at the beginning, don't touch the scalpel, and then the monkey finds the straight razor, and then there's a gap between that and when the monkey actually uses the straight razor.
The thing that I love about this is also that I also love that they basically I remember seeing the Creepers video art with that really distorted chimp where it's holding its arm over its head that's super whoa, and it's just even the new one has that same monkey with the straight razor, and it's yo, that's the last 30 seconds of the movie. It's the most Deus Ex Machina or Deus Ex Machina.
Oh, hey!
Dad jokes, man, I got it. But no, but it's just so funny that it's always front and center when that's kind of this weird twist that just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But that's also again why as we were discussing usernames, that's why I took that on, because it's just so jarring. Because you, as Lauren said, you completely forget about it. It's this monkey's walking around and yo, that's it. And I'm just gonna hang out wherever for the next 45 minutes or so until I see that someone's gonna kill Jennifer Connelly with sheet metal. Then I'm gonna rock it. But it's just super weird. It's just bizarre twist ending. But they always broadcast it. I think just because people are probably gonna look at it and say, I want to know more about this because this looks batshit insane.
We are winding things down, believe it.
No.
So, Brian, do you have anything you wanted to toss in? Any special moments that you'd like to make?
Any special moments
we haven't already
about the movie?
Yeah.
No, I mean,
your real special moments.
I feel like we just talked about this in Academia Giallo.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just say when I first discovered this movie, it pretty much opened the door for me for Italian horror and Argento films. So it kind of just it holds a special. It's not my favorite Argento film, but it definitely holds a special place in my heart. Because it's where else can you get? Like I said, I showed this to my wife, and she was super entertained with this movie, and it's not you have to sit down and dissect it and rationalize the whole thing or whatever, because it is what it is. It's a relic from the 80s that cannot can you imagine remaking this movie now with all the special effects and getting a monkey to wield a...
You would just see Andy Serkis would just do the mocap.
There you go.
He would play the flies too.
If they remade it today, PETA and Child Protective Services will be all over this movie.
But as well as little people that are actors,
No chance. But it's not a kid. It's a little. It doesn't matter.
I think people always...
There's swimming in maggots. Come on.
Still cruel and unusual.
You're drowning the maggots. That's not. No, you can't do that.
I think people always try to argue if it's giallo, if it's not giallo, it's Italian horror or whatever. But I think it's got so many elements in it. It's I do liken it to that thought process of just a bunch of people doing a lot of drugs and we got to throw this in the movie and this in the movie and we got to throw a telepathic girl that talks to insects and it's just so full of all these insane concepts that it just makes it a glorious film. So I think, if anybody watching this, which we haven't really discussed the film like in detail or whatever, which I think it's a good
You read
thing.
the back. You read the back. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because anybody just coming off the street and happening, across this show or whatever and seeing, hey, what's this movie about? Go in it cold and just watch it for what it is, because it's an amazing, from the very first scene where she like misses the bus and then gets her fucking head chopped off like minutes later into a goddamn do you have the little spoiler banner?
I do, but I threw it out.
But it's an amazing film that you'll never see anything like it ever again. So it's I love the film. And yeah.
and I would like to just toss in like the new release from Synapse, the UHD, is fantastic. It's a double disc. It has the international cut and Creepers on one disc, along with some really great featurettes. And on the UHD, it has the full 115-minute cut, and it also has that 2-hour documentary. And Troy Howarth does the audio commentary for the extended version. And then for the international version, it's Derek Botello and David Del Val. And both are just really terrific. It's a really solid package. So if you've been looking to upgrade, like this is a worthy upgrade. The UHD, I think with all of Argento's films, like seeing them in UHD does kind of take it up a notch. I think it is worth that upgrade.
Who put out the UHD?
Synapse.
Okay. So I wonder if they ported, like, is it all new content or do they?
No. A lot of this is ported over from the 2017 Arrow UK release.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like the documentary, the commentaries, things like that. Those are all ported over. I think they just really spent their time, as Synapse does, making the UHD look as good as it could. Except for that one scene with Fiore throwing her head back because, artistic choices.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much, gentlemen. This is about as much fun as I imagined it would be. So thank you all. I hope we can all get together again and talk Italian or anything else, because I love hanging out with you guys. Carl, we have yet to meet in person, so that's going to change at some point. But it's really great seeing all my old friends right in front of me again. So thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.